Good morning and welcome to the Point. Last week, we brought you our program live from Mackinac Island. And in that program, you saw part of our interview with Senator Gary Peters. We were talking about international tensions and problems around the globe. This morning, we continue with that conversation, this time on domestic issues and some of those issues that he's pursuing in the U.S. Senate. Talk to me about a couple of those, and one of those I think is pretty important when you talk about trying to free up some capital for some particular business and places, which in a hopefully growing economy, an economy that's still trying to come back, that kind of capital could be important.
Well, it is, and that's been my focus, as you know, Rick, is small business. In fact, one of the committees that I serve on is the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee in the U.S. Senate. Since day one when I was in the House, I've always been focused on capital to make sure the money is available to small business owners to start a business, to grow their business. We just recently passed legislation to expand the SBA 7A loans, which are very important for us in Michigan. And I'm working to expand on a program that I wrote and passed in my House years when I first came in 2009, which is the State Small Business Credit Initiative, which helps organizations like the MEDC at the state to do public-private partnerships, still working with local financial institutions and banks, but having loan guarantees, collateral support programs, some very innovative things that the MEDC does, but they need federal resources in order to do that. And I wrote legislation to provide that. That legislation has already been credited with nearly 9,000 jobs being created here in the state of Michigan. However, that money has now been used, and we'd like to have another tranche, and that's what I'm working on to see more resources coming into a program that has been proven to be successful in creating jobs.
And people should recognize that small business can be quite a bit bigger than you might think of it. I mean, it can be a lot of employees that are involved, still considered a small business, and some of those things they can operate on a number of different platforms, but in a economy where we still have a lot of manufacturing jobs that need these individual groups to do work. I mean, that's kind of where some of this comes in, where you end up getting the multiplier effect when you have those businesses that have the startup or the continuing operation capital, and I assume that's what you're shooting.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's a great way to describe it, is that these are jobs that also have indirect jobs that are being created as a result of that, particularly if you're in the manufacturing sector and smaller suppliers that may have high capital needs to get started, and it makes it difficult for them. They need to have access to that financing and in creative ways. And we're seeing that particularly in some of our urban areas too, where companies can be started in urban areas to create jobs in those places where people particularly need jobs.
One of the other things that I know that you've been working on, and again, I mentioned your military service earlier, but I know that you have a particular interest in military and veterans affairs, and you've been working on something that's maybe kind of a niche, but it seems like a pretty important thing to take care of those who may have some trouble with discharge.
Well, I have, and it is something that I feel very passionate about. I spend a great deal of time working on veterans issues, and my staff working to help folks have access to the VA, get the medical care that they have earned and they deserve to have. But we have, and a number of veterans groups have come to me and are now supporting legislation that I've introduced on a bipartisan basis. I have two key Republican co-sponsors with me to deal with folks who were discharged, and they may have been discharged, a general discharge or dishonorable because of some behaviors that they may have been involved in when they're in the service. And then it later turns out is those behaviors are actually tied to post-traumatic stress disorder or brain disorders that they got related to their service overseas in combat, but it was not diagnosed. So if it wasn't diagnosed when they were in the military and then they get a dishonorable discharge, now they don't have access to the VA. They don't have access to the care that they certainly have deserved and need to be brought back into the system. So the legislation is very straightforward, is that if you have medical evidence, credible medical evidence that the VA then does certify that you are suffering from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and that was related to why you were discharged. The discharge was overturned, you will get an honorable discharge, and now you can come back into the VA system and get the treatment that you need. It has the endorsement of major veterans groups who have seen this all too often, and we don't want to be in a situation where someone is suffering an illness that they have as a result of their service, and then because of a discharge, the taxpayers, the government says we're off the hook, we don't need to cover it. We owe our men and women who serve much more than that, and if they've legitimately suffering from PTSD, we want to make sure they get in the system and get the help that they need.
Finally, I want to talk to you about something that I think it's against the odds that we would have been talking about this 20 years ago, but we have seen this rapid development, not just of craft beers, but of distilleries, right here in West Michigan, all over the state actually. But I know that you very specifically are looking into something that could perhaps even expand that even further. This is kind of again a new area for us here in Michigan, but it seems to be growing at a pretty rapid rate. You'd like to help them.
Yeah, it is. It's a great small business. We were talking about small businesses earlier in the segment here, and Grand Rapids, of course, is Beer City, USA, and has a number of craft brewers. We've got small wineries, and now we have craft distillers that are coming out as a result of new legislation that has occurred recently. But I'm working to make that industry grow more robust. It is a growing industry in Michigan. We're number 3 in the country in terms of distillers. There are 40 distillers. We were one earlier at Long Road here in Grand Rapids, but they pay a very high excise tax, and that excise tax goes back to the days after the Prohibition with a very high tax. And so we want to change that for smaller distilleries. The big ones will still pay the tax that they're normally paying, but on the first 100,000 gallons of product, you'll have a significant reduction. And that'll help create even more of these distilleries, which are jobs in our local community. They're jobs on Main Street. They're great for tourism. And the other thing that I think is wonderful about this whole craft movement, whether it's beer or the spirits or wine, is it also spurs the agricultural sector in Michigan. So from barley to wheat to hops, all of that can be produced, because as people enjoy a locally crafted beverage, spirit at a distillery, they like to know also the ingredients also came from Michigan and came from our local farmers. So this is a win-win, bringing jobs locally, helping small businesses create those jobs in our community. And I think it's just going to continue to grow. We're seeing exciting things happen in our state. Other states are now starting to catch on to that as well, which is why I think we've got a good shot at passing this legislation, because other senators would like to see this kind of activity happening in their communities as well.
And as sure as there is a little cool feel in the air and football season has begun again, in Washington, the betting is all about a government shutdown, because when spending limits or when spending periods come to an end, there are always some arguments. Give me your crystal ball best guess. We've had a lot of Republicans say we don't want a shutdown, but we know there are significant differences in the way that they would spend money and the way Democrats would spend money. Where do we go from here?
Well, we have to have a normal budget process to go through that in the appropriations, and to have those very robust debates. We have to be able to set what those limits are and then prioritize. I hope we don't have a shutdown. I'm going to do everything in my power not to have a shutdown. I think it is really unacceptable that we get to the point where you no longer provide services to the people of this great country because we're not able to do our job, which is basically what it is. Legislators haven't done our job to come together to find that common ground and to make those tough decisions. So I think there are enough of my Republican colleagues who do not want to have a shutdown. I know I'm against it, and my Democratic colleagues as well, and certainly the American people deserve better.
Our thanks to Senator Peters. Also on Mackinac Island last week, we sat down and talked with Governor Rick Snyder. We talked to him about his final 3.5 years in office, the things he would like to achieve, and what he sees as the most important thing he can do between now and the end of his term. For you, in your final term as governor, is this an opportunity to talk with some of those 2,000 and network with others to talk about your agenda going forward? You and I had a conversation earlier in one of the forums and kind of talked about what you would like to do going forward. It occurs to me you're not quite finished with your agenda yet.
No, there's still a lot of important things. So it's important to have that dialogue continue, Rick. So that is an opportunity to share that. And so that's why I was happy to have the talk today and share those thoughts and feelings, because there's a lot more to do. The amazing part is we are the comeback state. We've done so many wonderful things, but let's not stop. So what are the next series of issues and problems that we need to address? A great illustration is this issue about the skilled trades and more engineering talent needed. We're doing well enough now from an employment point of view. We're hearing from employers and people looking to build and grow in Michigan that they're concerned about having people with the right skill sets. We've got great people, but let's do this career tech education even more so.
I know how interested you are in that, but I want to just step aside for a minute. I know you said no credit, no blame, but here we are 4.5 years after you took office, and people are coming to you and saying, we need more workers. How satisfying is that?
Oh, it's great. I mean, it does make you feel good. But the way I view it is I think you know me well enough. It's like, well, we solved that problem. Let's go solve this one, and what's the one after that? Because that's the nice part is this is a good problem to have in a relative sense. Now we have employers wanting to find more people to work in Michigan in great, well-paying jobs. We have still a number of Michiganders looking for those opportunities. Let's figure out how to make that connection happen, because it's a win for all of us. It's a win for those individuals, it's a win for companies, but it's a win for our society.
Let me shift gears. You have just been on a couple of trade missions. You've been visiting some folks. You announced the relocation of a headquarters of an automotive entity back into Michigan. Tell me what those trips are like, because there are some pretty big hurdles sometimes in doing business internationally, yet it is part of the global economy that we have to exist in. So what has your reception been when you say, I'm the governor of Michigan? What do people say?
Well, it's been great. When I first started a few years ago, the classics were, where is Michigan? And then quite often it'd be a negative comment on Detroit, because that was the more global perception. Now when I show up, it's like, we know about Michigan. It sounds really interesting, and it's like, wow, Detroit's amazing. There's good stuff going on. And that's created this environment now, Rick, where quite often we jump not into explaining the issues of Michigan or who we are. We can have a tangible discussion about, what do you need to be successful in our state? Why shouldn't you invest? And let's get going. And how can we help you find the most talented people, the wonderful people we have in our state, with the right training to get you jump started?
Something that kind of plays into that, and it's not the only factor, but it is a factor, and it's roads, it's infrastructure. And you and I have talked about this now for years. I know.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me for years.
Well,
it is
but the fact of the matter is, and as you pointed out, it's taken years. Each time this has happened, it's been an ongoing discussion, because there are a lot of different avenues. And in pointing that out, I was pointing out that I know what your thoughts are on it, but give me your thoughts on where this is going. You've been meeting with the legislative leaders. It starts there. They have to decide if they can get to the 55, 54 votes, whatever they're going to need in the House. And over in the Senate, you got to get at least 19 and have the lieutenant governor on board. You can probably count on his vote. And then for you to sign it, we edge in that way?
Yeah, no, it's going reasonably well. And again, I don't want to get too over-optimistic about it, but we've had a lot of meetings of leadership of both parties, of both chambers, and with each meeting we're getting incrementally closer to a solution where we're taking issues off the table and narrowing that list. And I hope within the next few weeks we'll get to the point of saying, is it time to take it to a vote of both chambers and get something done? And you're right, Rick, traditionally this has taken several years each time it came up. We're in that area where I hope we can get a strong legislative solution that's responsible, that our citizens will be proud of, and be able to drive on safer, better roads, which will create even more jobs.
But that also plays back into the economic development, because obviously people, if they're going to put a manufacturing plant, or even if they're going to build just an office building, they want to make sure that the people that they employ have the ability to get back and forth safely. And so, I mean, that is an economic tool to some degree.
It is. Well, the transportation is one of the fundamentals of building a strong economy. And that's why we do need to invest more. And we're going to have better practices go with that, in terms of better contracting practices, more responsible actions, in terms of how we bid contracts for both state and local level. There's a lot of good reforms that are part of this package that I think people will be proud of.
How does Michigan government / politics look different to you today sitting on this porch than maybe the 3 years before you ran the first time around? How does it look and feel different?
Well, it was broken before. I mean, to be blunt, we had budget shutdowns 2 of the 3 years before I took office. We were in free fall in terms of having a big deficit, in terms of unemployment. Look at where we're at today. We're leading the nation in manufacturing job creation. We're number 5 in private sector job creation. Personal incomes are coming back. Detroit's coming back. So many good messages are going on. And my concern now is I don't want us to get complacent nor content with where we've been. I mean, it's good, it's exciting, but let's keep going. This is not the time to slow down. We should be going even faster, and that's why I'm excited to have several more years to continue that path, and then hopefully build a longer-term legacy of success that'll go beyond my time in office. Because it's not about me ever being governor. I want to have a Michigan that we're all proud of that'll last for generations.
You talked about in our earlier discussion a sense of urgency, and you described it in, I thought, a very interesting way. You say you wake up each morning, and what do you think?
I've got one less day to be governor of Michigan. It's an honor being governor, and it's a unique opportunity to make these large-scale changes that are improving our state. So every day I wake up with a sense of urgency to say, I got to get to work, and be fired up to say there's more to do, because I've got one less day being governor before my time's up.
Our thanks to Governor Snyder and Senator Peters for being on the program this morning. And when we return, something special. As you well know, there's a new aircraft carrier that will bear the name of President Gerald R. Ford. The commissioning of that carrier is coming up, and we're going to be talking with someone who knows a little bit about defense, former Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld. Next, to the point. Donald Rumsfeld has served as Secretary of Defense not once, but twice. He was also Chief of Staff for President Ford. A new aircraft carrier that will bear President Ford's name will be commissioned soon. At a recent event for that carrier, we talked with the former Secretary of Defense. Mr. Secretary, I want to talk to you about this magnificent ship and about, as the perspective of a former Secretary of Defense twice, what you think about it. But before I do, I want to ask you this. After all this time and all these years, you are constantly coming back and doing something with Ford Museum or Foundation. You spoke so eloquently at the christening of this ship. What keeps you coming back after all your years of government service? You served at least 3 presidents and probably more.
4. Gerald Ford was the only president who was a personal friend. Our time together in the United States Congress was spent in almost daily contact when he was running first for conference chairman and then for minority leader. And Bob Griffin, congressman from Michigan, and Charlie Goodell from New York, and I were kind of the campaign managers for Gerald Ford when he ran for minority leader. And you get to know a person pretty well doing that. And he was so important in steadying the ship of state during such troubled times for our country. I mean, people forget that he's the only man in the history of our long history of our country now who never ran for president, never ran for vice president, had never even aspired to be president or vice president, and yet served in the Oval Office as president of the United States. It was unprecedented, it was unexpected, and because of his human qualities, his basic human decency, his character, he was able to reassure the American people. And serving as White House Chief of Staff for a man who'd never run for president was probably the hardest job I ever had. And I've had a lot of jobs at 83 years. But working with him was a joy because he was such a fine, decent, honorable man of integrity.
I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but you just said something that kind of sparked a thought. How do you go from being the ambassador to NATO to being the chief of staff at the White House? Those are, I mean, they're both big jobs, but they're very different jobs, I would think.
They are indeed. Fortunately, I'd worked in the White House for the preceding 4 years, 69, 70, 71, before I left in early 73 to go over to NATO. And so I knew the building, I knew the people, I knew the process. I'd been in the president's cabinet, his predecessor's cabinet. And the great advantage I had was my relationship with Gerald Ford. I mean, if you're working in a job that important as White House Chief of Staff is, with somebody you don't know, or somebody of a different human qualities, it can be a terrible assignment, very difficult. In my case, it was a hard job because he was unprepared. He didn't have a staff. He didn't have a cabinet. He hadn't spent years developing policy teams and all of that. But he was such a wonderful human being that it made the job at the same time difficult to be sure, but also easy because you enjoyed every day working with him.
All right, let's talk a little bit about this process. As I said, you spoke at the christening for this ship that is getting closer and closer all the time to becoming a reality. You talked about it from your perspective as serving in the military. You talked about it from your perspective of your relationship with President Ford. I want to ask you from a little different perspective. As someone who twice served as Secretary of Defense, we're in another pitched political battle and people are talking about military preparedness. What does, from your experience as as the head of the Defense Department, what does a ship like this bring to the U.S. military and to the U.S. period?
My first experience with an aircraft carrier, my dad served on one in World War II. And it was a CVE, a carrier escort. Some years later, I did my carrier qualifications as a naval aviator aboard the same ship Gerald Ford served on, the USS Monterey, which I've always found some of interest, and it pleased me. It was 10 years after he stopped serving on it. I was going through my naval flight training. In answer to your question, a carrier battle group, of which a carrier like this will be the finest piece of equipment that the United States of America has, is a presence in the world. To be sure, it has physical capabilities of imposing damage on others, but its real value is as a deterrent and as a presence. When we move a carrier battle group from one part of the world to another part of the world, it is noticed. It is seen. There is an understanding of the capabilities of not just this ship and the aircraft that will travel with it, but the entire battle group. I must say, one of the things I did when I was Secretary of Defense the second time, I took a group of defense ministers from NATO out aboard a United States aircraft carrier. And I don't think there was anything I did as Secretary of Defense that had as much impact on our NATO allies. You take 15 back in those days, now it's 25 or 30 countries in NATO, but you take 15 ministers of defense out on a carrier battle group that's operating in the Mediterranean and show them carrier operations, and it's something they will never forget. They get a real personal sense of the capability, the power, the power projection that this aircraft carrier represents.
When you think about this in terms of the man that you said you had a personal relationship with, that you served on a number of different levels, including Secretary of Defense, a man that you stayed close with throughout your careers and beyond, and other friends of yours, I have to mention former Vice President and former Secretary of State Dick Cheney. I know that he was very instrumental in the Ford administration as well. What does it mean to you? What does it mean to the guys and women who served with President Ford in that tumultuous time in the White House, that you look over your shoulder and soon you'll be looking on the high seas at the newest, not just the newest carrier, but the newest class of carrier that carries his name?
Yeah. Well, I guess the last class was the Nimitz, and Gerald Ford, as president, when I was serving as his chief of staff, spoke at the commissioning of the Nimitz class, and it's been all these years since 1975, 40 years, 4 decades, and this ship and this class of ship will be around probably for another 40 or 50 years, and it will serve all across the globe. It will contribute to a more peaceful and stable world, and it is right, in my view, that the last class was Admiral Nimitz, a World War II naval veteran and patriot, that this new class be Gerald Ford, a World War II naval officer and veteran of that conflict, who went on to do such amazing things for our country.
If you want to know more about the Gerald R. Ford, the new aircraft carrier, or about the commissioning ceremonies, you can follow the link at woodtv.com. And we'll be back with more To the Point. In the weeks ahead, here are some of the issues we'll be following. What happens with Michigan roads? That continues to be something we're watching in Lansing. The same with a new energy policy and maybe even auto no-fault reform. All of those things, plus that big special election in Allegan County. Expect to see it all right here each Sunday morning when you join us at 10 o'clock for To the Point.